Yeah, we're live, and it's even before 7 o'clock, which is awesome because last time we were a little bit late, and I ran into technical difficulties. We ran the internet connection here is not fantastic. As a matter of fact, it's not even good. It's sub good. So we run into internet connection problems all the time. We lose the TV and everything, and obviously I lose my channel when I'm doing my channel. So I need to make changes for that. I need to make some changes, and we're going to get into that discussion in a little bit. But first of all, we want to start off with the video that I put up comparing the 383 small block Chevy and the 383 LS. Hopefully you guys like the individual runner photo that I put up the thumbnail. That was cool. That's something that I did for, I think that one was for the guys from Speedmaster way back. And we did it, we tested it on a fairly mild motor, but the IR stuff looks very cool. And we can talk about that just very quickly, because I put that thumbnail up. So obviously we have to discuss it at least a little bit before we get into the subject matter that I put up in the description. That particular test, we ran the IR deal, and that's that's fuel injection. It's not Weber's, although that same manifold would work with downdraft Weber's as well. Those are really cool because they look fantastic. And when you pop the hood, having a single four barrel with a dual plane, that works great on most applications. But popping the hood and seeing an IR or a tunnel ram or a blower, it has more wow factor. Those things also work fairly well. And I got some comments that I was reading today about individual runner stuff, and there was a little bit of confusion on why they make more power. But it's a couple of different things, and this works whether it's a small block Chevy or an LS or Ford or any kind of motor that you put these IR deals on, because I've run them on a number of things. And the reason that they make power, one, is flow rate. Obviously, you have that many. Normally, those are about 2-inch butterflies, and then they could be bigger, they could be smaller, but around 50 millimeters or so is kind of standard for those things. If we have 8 of those, think about having a 50 millimeter throttle body. You're thinking, yeah, that's not very big. That's not going to flow very well. No, but I think about having 8 of them now. Think about what the flow rate is of 8 50 millimeter throttle bodies. It's a lot. So each port flows very, very well, and that allows it right there to make power. The other thing that they usually have that benefits the IR deal, like on the photo that I showed, whether it's a cross ram or a downdraft, whatever it is that they also have usually ample runner length. And as we know, runner length helps determine where these things make power. So usually these things are very torquey. So look back at the big block stuff that they ran in Can-Am and the Crowler and the Hilborn injection, that kind of stuff. And this is the same kind of thing. The other thing that's cool is these throttle bodies, you can change the stack length above the throttle bodies. You could also make it, one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to make it bend 90 degrees just so it fits under more things. So you can do that, and you can change the runner length. You can change where these things effectively make power, but that's primarily what it is. And in this instance, we're injecting the fuel fairly low, but relatively high relative to the manifold portion of it. It would be nice if it actually went into the stack, then it would make more power. And I've done that test. That video is up on the Honda where I did a TWM IR deal and put the fuel injectors out in front of the stack. And I even made a slider plate so that we could adjust where they were relative to the air horn. So if you inject fuel there, you get lots of charge cooling, and it makes more power. So changing the position of the injector works good. The other thing that works good is one of the reasons, and I was explaining this to the gentleman I was talking to, is when you're with the carburetors, you also have charge cooling from the introduction of fuel from the carburetor. So that works very well. That's one reason that Weber carburetors work so well. The downside to these, and we'll get through that very quickly, but the downside to this is getting all of those butterflies to open up simultaneously. Like a wide open throttle, that's very easy. If you mat it and go to full throttle, you can get all the blades so they're at 100 or 101, it's over center. If they're all in that range, really the performance is going to be the same, unless your motor is in a position to take advantage of 100% of the airflow, which is not usually the case. In which case 99 or 98 would be restricting it. That's not the norm, that it has more airflow than it needs. Where you run into throttle, where you run at idle. So if one of them opens up at 1 or 2% and the other one isn't open yet, or is open at 3 or 4%, and there's a variation because then the relative difference from a percentage standpoint is great. So if you get one that's not opened up yet and one of them is opened up at 1 or 2%, you have air flowing through one of them and not through the other. And so you don't have fuel flowing, and it's just the thing idles bad and it runs bad and the drivability is bad. So getting them all synced so they open up at exactly the same point is really difficult on these IR setups. Even on ones that where you have the ideal situation is that all the butterflies have a common shaft. So when you open them, they all open at the same rate. Even that is very difficult. So that's really the Achilles heel of these. They've kind of cured one of the other problems for fuel injection anyway was the signal for the mass air meter, or not for the mass air meter, for the map sensor. So if you just take a signal from one, and again, if we're seeing, especially if there's a difference, 1%, 2%, and 3% in different holes, and you're taking a signal from just one of the cylinders and you're opening the throttle, well, it's only going to give the amount of fuel that's required for that cylinder and not the others, which may be at a different opening rate. So that's where the opening rate is very critical. But the way that they've gotten around this is now they're taking an average cylinder reading for the map sensor. So they have basically, you can do it one of two ways. Some of these manifolds have holes in them, and then they have a common plenum in the base of the manifold, and then they take a map sensor reading from that common plenum that's connected to all of the cylinders. The other way to do it externally, and this is the same thing, you just run a bunch of hoses, so you have a hole above the plenum, well, not the plenum, but above the base of the manifold, and you just run fittings and then lines and then tee all those lines together and then run that to the map sensor. And that's the same thing, as long as it's on the underside of the throttle blade, so that you get a signal from all the cylinders. And that helps with drivability. And that really is the thing. The other kind of downside to these things is it's hard to get filtration for these things that doesn't hurt power. So you get, the stack injection is awesome. Radius air horns are awesome. They look good. They flow well. They make a lot of power, but you get a lot of dirt in there. And your motor's not going to last as long without running an air filter on there. So then there are lots of screens for these. The screens that just stretch out over basically the opening, but those are terrible. Most of the ones that I've tested kill power by a lot. Now, there are some that guys run, like the off-road trucks that guys often run at Westech, trophy trucks. They have stack injection, but they have the stack injection going into a common plenum. So it's not, I think it's technically not an IR manifold anymore, but they have a big common plenum and then a huge filter assembly, because they're racing out in the desert and they would kill the motor with all of the dust and dirt and stuff that would be going in there. So they need a good filtration system. They also need one that's not restrictive. They also need one that introduces cold air. So they have a lot of things that they need to do to introduce this and make it work. And they do that very well. So that's one application where you can do that. But running the individual stacks and the individual filters, you have to make sure, and we've done a lot of testing on it, make sure that you're not restricting the inlet on your supercool stack injection when you're trying to put filters on, which, by the way, is the right thing to do. So they make good power. They can be problematic for drivability. Make sure you get good filters on. So that's the stack injection stuff. But now we need to talk about the 383 small block Chevy versus 383 LS. So if you guys took a look at that video that I put up, you'll see that the LS did a little better. And obviously, like a lot of these tests, this isn't a dedicated build where I ran both of them and tried to exactly match the parts. These are two combinations of many that I've run. I've run lots of 383 LS motors and lots of 383 small blocks. And these are the kind of closest that I could get to having the same kind of head flow and the same kind of camshaft. And really for these, I was kind of looking more for them to make the same kind of power curve, or at least the same peak power. And I got fairly close, but it just took a lot more camshaft. Now, there were some things going on with this particular motor. The camshaft was not ideal for this motor. It was, however, and I didn't put this in the video, it was a 4.7 swap cam, and we didn't figure that out because this wasn't a cam that I put in the motor. The short block came to me, and then we did a bunch of testing with it. So it turned out it was a 4.7 cam swap, which is unusual, and especially it was unnecessary, but it was that, and so it had that benefit. But I don't think that the specs were right on the cam. It wouldn't be the cam that I would have picked for this combination to optimize power. The Dragon Slayer heads are very good for the small block Chevy. I've run those a bunch. The single plane intake is kind of what we would run. I don't know that I would run that one. Maybe a Super Victor. A tunnel ram would be better, and it probably would have been better to run the carbureted induction system on the LS. Had I run a Victor Jr. on there, the power would have been much, much lower on the LS, because that's not a good manifold. The Super Victor is much better, and so are some of the other single plane manifolds that are available for that. So that would have been maybe a little bit better. But what I wanted to show is more like what the average guy would put together. So if the average guy's putting together a 383 and he's going to put that kind of cam in it, and he has heads that flow 300 CFM, he's going to have a single plane on it. I mean, I know that that's what I would put together, and that's what most guys would put together. They probably wouldn't put one of the things I would have liked to have tried was an Edelbrock ProFlow style manifold for the small block, tunnel ram, fuel injected, front throttle body, that kind of thing. That might have showed a little bit better. But if it's a carbureted 383 and you have a 245-ish camshaft in there and a Dragon Slayer head that flows really well, you're going to have a single plane intake. There may have been better ones than the Speedmaster one that I used, and may have been a better camshaft. So I think that they might be able to get closer. But in all the testing I've done, and I talked extensively to Brule and guys about this, we just don't see the small block making LS power, and some guys pointed out the fact that, well, the LS had a bigger cam. It really didn't. It had more lift, but the lift has much less of an effect in all of my testing, has much less of an effect on power than the duration does. Now, you can get to some points where lift becomes more beneficial, but in this instance, I don't think that was it. So we had a lot less duration in the LS cam, and yet it still made good power. And I wanted to test it with a long runner intake manifold. The fast is about the best there is for a cathedral port application. And I think that that's a big part of it. There's really no fast manifold available for a small block Chevy. There's nothing, I think, that works as well on a small block Chevy as the fast does on a cathedral port LS. And I think that that's a big part of it. We can do other things to the small block. There are obviously good heads for them. We could put a shallower valve angle head on it. They make, obviously an 18-degree head. Those were years back. Those were the hot race setups. Now they have 13 to 14-degree small block Chevy heads that flow 400 CFM. And we could certainly do that, but that would be very, very rare. And those would be dedicated race applications like these trophy trucks and drag race applications and stuff. And not very many people would be doing it. It also require dedicated pistons and things. And probably you would run more camshaft than this with the cylinder head like that. So you can make power with them. But my point more in this video was that the power that you make, what does the average guy do when he puts together a 383 small block or a 383 LS? And I think that this kind of showed it fairly well. So let me know what you guys think, and let me know if you think that the small block can indeed compete with it with the right set of components. I've had people tell me, oh, you know what you're talking about. We make 600 all the time with 383s. It's just that when we run them on the dyno, we don't see that. So let me know what you guys think. Because that was an interesting test. Somebody had mentioned a while ago that they wanted to see a 383 versus 383, and I said, well, I've got a bunch of them, so I can kind of put that together. And to go along with that, in the next video that I'm doing is Turbo LS stuff, because everybody likes Turbo LS stuff, kind of do-it-yourself kits. And the things that they worry about and the things that they should worry about and the things that they shouldn't worry about, especially where most of us are, which is the 1,000 horsepower, 1,100, 1,200, whatever the number is, doesn't matter how high it is, but it's that and below kind of thing. We tend, and I know because I get comments and I get calls and emails and messages and all kinds of stuff. Oh, what about this and this and this? I'm like, look, you're worried about the wrong thing. You don't need to worry about that. So I thought I would go through some tests that I've run on a 4.8, a 5.3, and 6.0 using the same kind of turbo combination or the same kind of turbo do-it-yourself kit that I made, and show some of the results of that, and talk about what things that you need to be concerned with and what things you shouldn't be concerned with, and why you should just get it together and get boost and run it. And then obviously when you add boost, good things will happen. So let's see what you guys are doing. It's really hot here. It's probably almost 100, I would imagine. I've got our fan going. Our air conditioning is not working right now, so I did what I could to try to make that work, but I was unsuccessful. My wife is sending me pictures of a puppy. I hope they don't bring home a new puppy. So let's see what you guys are doing. Let's see. Is the LS rotating assembly significantly lighter? I don't think that it is, but we could weigh that. And one of the other things that guys brought up is, what about the ring pack? Now, the ring pack on the motors that we used, the 383 used a more modern ring pack. It wasn't a 5/16. It was a metric ring pack. So I don't think that they were that far off. And I don't know how much power you would see. I would kind of like to do a ring pack test where we change the ring pack, from whatever 20 pounds down to 4 pounds or whatever the ratings are on the ring pack, to see if it actually does change power. We can see a little bit of that by, I like to, when I'm putting a motor together, I like to put one piston assembly in and tighten it up, and then we rotate it once and go, okay, it takes this amount, or even if I just do it by feel. What I want to do is know that after I put in each one and I rotate it, it still rotates fine. It's not bound up. That I'm really looking for big stuff there. But you can also, if you want to, you can check and see with a torque wrench is one way that guys do it. You can check and see how much breakaway torque it takes to before the thing will start spinning, and kind of get an idea how much the drag is on each one, and see if that's changing in a consistent amount. Make sure that one's not bound up or broke, or and also make sure and see where you are beforehand and see where you are afterwards to see what the total drag is, because it's always better to have more information. Let's see. Andy wants to know if the LS heads have more low and mid lift. I need to look at the exact flow data on the heads that we tested. I would suspect that they do. I would suspect that the valve angle would manifest itself in low and mid lift changes. I hope that that's true. I think that it is, but I'd like to see a direct comparison. I know that they have lots of good small block heads, and I think that if you look at an AFR 195 small block head, it's going to have good mid-lift flow. So I think it's going to be a lot closer to an LS than we would think. Just watch the video. Aftermarket block uses small block bottom, uses LS head. Yeah, I've seen the blocks that have that. The Dart LS Next block, I think, does that. Sandra Fell is in the house. Solid rollers with a tight LSA helps a small block and big block make better power with less duration. I agree. And this one was 110, if I remember right. So it was not ultra tight, but it was not, 115 or 16. And this was a hydraulic roller. Both of them were hydraulic rollers. Let's see. Hi, Rich. I want to use the oil level sending unit on my LT1 oil pan for a drain back, but it's submersed below the oil level. Will it still drain? It will, but it's not ideal. I have run on the dyno. We've run the oil from the turbo mounted on one side, looped it all the way around underneath the oil pan, and then into a fitting I had on the other side. And it will eventually get up to that level. But it's not ideal for draining. Like on the dyno, it wasn't a big deal, but I don't think I want to drive around like that. I found power in my small block Chevy switching to 8mm LS valves and lightweight LS springs and components. I've also picked up 25 horsepower switching from a distributor to coil and plug. See, Pablo, we don't ever see changes from going from a distributor to coil unplug. We've run 1,000 horsepower stuff with distributors and ignition amplifiers, and I don't know how you're going to pick up that from a coil unplug thing. Is usually when you're running into problems with the coil, with a single coil, like the rise time of the coil not being able to, because what happens basically, if the rise time isn't fast enough, you don't have all of the coil energy output to each one of the plugs if there isn't sufficient time. That usually happens at higher RPM, and it usually happens at, if you need, usually it supplies more than it needs. So it has an overabundance. And especially if you have the plug gaps down on a boosted application like where you should, that's usually less of a problem. I haven't seen power changes, and I've never seen 25. When somebody tells me that they pick up 25 horsepower from something, that tells me that there was probably a misfire going on somewhere. If you take a motor that's running correctly with a distributor and you put a coil on plug deal, it'll probably do nothing. My 243 heads will be good for your 5.3. Yeah, you can run 243s on a 5.3 motor. They will work good. What's your opinion on bore versus stroke ratio for this test, or is the ratio difference in this test not big enough? The big part of the test is that they were both 383 inches. If anything, the way that people normally look at this performance thing is that if you have a bigger bore, your head will flow better, and therefore you can make more power, which is why most race motors are short stroke and big bore. They do it. I mean, a lot of people want to talk about piston speed, but the reality is that they do it so that they could get lots and lots of head flow. And so if any one of them had an advantage, it should be the small block Chevy with a slightly bigger bore, a 4030 versus the 3905 on the LS. So you would think that that would be better, but that's not the way that the power thing worked out. Yes, 243 and 799s are the same. Some of the original 243 on the LS6 stuff had lightweight valves in them, but for what you're doing, that's not really an issue. Jewish wants to know if I've ever tested a Pro Systems SV1 single barrel carburetor. I have never done it. Is there a difference in throttle response using a single blade versus four smaller blades? I would think that there would be, and especially on a carburetor, that becomes less of an issue when you're telling the motor how much fuel you're delivering, rather than on a carburetor, the motor is asking for a certain amount of fuel and the carburetor is delivering that. And so four smaller blades can improve throttle response compared to a single big blade. And with fuel injection, like I said, that becomes less of a problem, because even if the big blade is opening up and needs a certain amount of fuel, we can always supply whatever fuel it wants. The big blade, though, and this is especially true on positive displacement supercharged applications, is it becomes really, really touchy, because you open it up just a little bit, it has lots of airflow, and then wants to make a lot of power, and it kind of surges forward. So drivability can become a little bit of an issue there with the big single blade. I'm not sure if you have already, but would you ever test transmissions that are commonly combined with LSs to see which can hold up more power? I won't ever get involved in transmissions because it's not what I do. Mr. Bandit, it's a flow problem. The LS heads just have better flow design. You have to use an SB2 head. I don't know that that's true. I think we can have small block heads that flow the same as an LS head, and I still don't think that we get the same power from the 383 small block as we get from the LS, because I think it's more than that. What would happen going from a 1:5 ratio to a 1:7 ratio rocker? Going from a 1:5, 20 horsepower is a big gain in power. And sometimes rockers do nothing. Sometimes rockers do add power. I don't know that I've seen a 20 horsepower gain. If you're talking about going from a 1.5 to a 1.7 on a small block Ford, I'm assuming, because a 1.7 is stock on an LS. And so you could change the lift quite a bit, but only if the motor and the head and everything responds to the additional lift. There's no absolute number for if you change this rocker ratio, I get 20 or I get 10, like you're suggesting there. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes all it does is, if we put a higher ratio rocker, sometimes all it does is introduce valve float and allow you not to rev the motor. Yeah, the factory HEI actually works very well, especially if you bring the plug gap down. And if you run like what we normally do, if you run an MSD and an ignition amplifier and bring the plug gap down and have good plugs and wires and stuff, we've done 4-digit stuff with small blocks and big blocks, and we've done way more than that with big blocks without any problem at all. Let's see. Hey, hi, Richard. I was getting ready to build a motor for my car. I have a 4th gen Recport 6-liter. So kind of like an LY6. And I have a built small block 400 with Brodix heads. I'm not sure which direction. The 6-liter ultimately, I think, is going to make more power. Thinner rings don't cause oil burning. Some of these comments. Let's see. Cheapest route, stock LS carb with an ignition controller. That works good. Lots of guys doing that. Thin rings are low tension garbage. Mike, don't sugarcoat it. Just tell us how you feel, man. The way to combat what most people combine with the low tension rings are somebody tell me what the little what the little holes are in the pistons. Why can't I think of that name? Somebody chime in with what that's called. Let's see. Do LS heads have more lift and more low lift and more mid lift? It depends. It depends on which heads you're comparing it to. I agree, Aaron. The 400 Mopar is kind of cool with that big bore and short stroke. Richard, we lost you yesterday, and the 2.3-liter turbo Ford, what they use is the 2.3 Volvo red top head, dual overhead cam. Okay. Is that a 4-valve? It's got to be a 4-valve head, right? I read in the late 70s, Pontiac rated engines after transmissions for insurance EPA. I think that's a myth. I just watched Horsepower TV today, and they had a small block Chevy with LS heads on it. It's probably one of the Dart LS Next blocks that they have. They created an LS block, but made the bottom of it like a conventional small block because they said that the oiling and communication was better, because that's one of the Achilles heels of the Gen 3, and that's why they went to the Gen 4 block with communication tunnels, because it has oiling issues and you have more pumping losses like that. So that's one modification that they did make to the Gen 4 one, and they just took that one step further by eliminating that altogether. It's not a deep skirt block. It's more like a conventional 4-bolt main small block. Gas ported pistons. That's what I was trying to think of earlier. Why are belt drives for small block Chevy so expensive when they are standard on some stock motors? There's a belt drive would be standard on overhead cam motors mostly. I don't know that I've seen them on a cam and block deal. Same question about shaft rockers. That's the way that the factory did some of those. Like the Dodge has shaft rockers and the Hemi has shaft rockers. What about real dyno numbers versus what manufacturers actually made during smog years? Like give me, for instance, like the 190 horsepower L69 small block Chevy. The way that we tested, it's going to make more than what the smog guys were talking about. Especially if you get rid of all the smog equipment, with the way that we run it, it always makes more power than the way that they rate it. Because when they rate it, especially when they went to the net rating, when they went to the gross rating, we would be a lot closer, because that was more like the way that we run it. When it was the gross rating, they ran it on the engine dyno in optimized condition with a cold temperature. And now with the net rating, they ran it essentially. And what they're doing now is they're running it the way that it is in the car. They don't rate it at the tire, they rate it at the flywheel, but it has everything that it came from the factory. It has the complete air intake system. It's run at temperature. It's run at coolant temperature. It's run with a factory tune. It's run with full accessories. It's run with full exhaust. Everything is in the motor the way that it is in the car, and that's what they rate it at. But when we do it, we don't test it like that, so our numbers are usually higher. Let's see, if you ever did a head swap on a 5-liter Ford, you know that all the power's in the heads. Yes, as long as you have a camshaft. Because if you just put a really good set of heads on a stock 5-liter, it still doesn't make a lot of power. What about installing Keith Black pistons in a 4200? I want to put pistons in it, but I want to put Ford's pistons in it. Hey, Richard, what do you think about the episode of Horsepower TV where they put an LS top end on a 350 small block Chevy bottom end? I haven't seen that. I thought that they did it with a dart block. 102 millimeter throttle body on my 5 LS383 with a stage 3 cam TBS assist. Christopher, the opening in that TBS intake is not 102 millimeters, so you don't need that. Doesn't matter how big of a throttle body you put on there. It's only going to flow as the opening of the manifold flows unless you're porting that out or using some kind of an adapter. If you already have the throttle body, it will work. But when you bolt to that manifold, make sure that the blade doesn't hit the opening in the manifold, because it might, or you may have, unless you have some sort of adapter on it. The piston rings on an LS stock are different than an early Chevrolet stock, but you can get small block Chevy pistons with any kind of ring package that you want. Would you go with a Dart small block Chevy block or a 4-bolt main for a boat at around 800? Yeah, if you're going to run sustained at 800 horsepower in a boat like guys will, then I would put a good block in it. Yeah, gas ports, that's what... Yeah, the vacuum pumps are more beneficial with low tension rings. That's what Brule has done that test many times. And the vacuum pump adds more power when you have low tension rings and not conventional rings. In your 383 LS test, did the LS heads have more low and middle flow? I don't know. I need to look at the flow numbers on them and see. In the process of building a Gen 1 396 stroker, what twin 7875 turbos in it, 300-degree duration cam, and 697 lift. Yeah, that's a lot of cam. If you're trying to make everything that those turbos have to offer, which is going to be up near 2,000 horsepower. I don't recognize, Jim, I don't recognize the name Bob Cosby's 12-second Fox body stock engine. They did rule streets for many years. I don't see how you get a stock 5-liter to run in the 12s. They could get them to go in the 13s pretty easily. Horsepower TV's motor is the test you should do. No, if they already did it, then it's already done. I don't need to redo it. A Motown LS block, okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't think you would want to put small block or LS heads on a conventional small block. Need to test the LS Holly mid-rise. I've tested it multiple times with a spacer and late electric quadrajet to get the TPS sensor input. LS power with quadrajet secondary HAL. The secondary HAL is a good idea. The mid-rise is not a good manifold. Should I run dish pistons for a boosted 383? Yeah, you're probably going to have to, unless you run a head that has a big chamber on it. Julius just picked up a Garrett GT55 from Aussie eBay for under $1,000. Now I have to find something to put it on. That's a lot of turbo. Julius, I just sent, and if the other guys are watching too, I just sent out all of the books and all of the shirts that I had ordered. I think I have 3 or 4 shirts left of the Killer Bee stuff, and I have a few Hemi books left. So I'll show you the shirt. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I've got a few shirts left. The Killer Bee Racing shirt. Signed. I have some large and extra large. I think I only have 2 extra larges, and I have 3 or 4 larges, and then some Hemi, Gen 3 Hemi books. So if you guys are interested in those, send me an email before they're all gone. And then if I do shirts like this one, like Let's Make Some Noise, or we do Wrong Cam, that kind of stuff, what kind of sizes are you guys interested in? So I can get an idea of what to put my first order in for. Let me know what you guys want, and that way when I order them, I don't order a bunch of smalls, although if you want to buy them for your girlfriends or your wives, that works too. And what I was going to say, Julius, you have a package. I have sent a package to you. It's on the way. So let me know when you get that. Or the 240 horsepower Grand National that ran high 13s, 240 at 4,400 RPM. Yeah, I thought the Grand National was rated at 245. Was that what it? Because it was rated just a little bit higher. Was it rated just a little bit higher than the L98? Question about rod ratio controversy. If short rods rob power, where does the excess power go? Friction in the cylinder wall. I'd imagine. I don't agree with that. I don't know that that's actually a thing. Or if it is, I haven't seen anybody prove that to me. Scorpion makes a small block Chevy 1.7 rocker. You can test on a 383, then it would be the same ratio as the LS. I know, but it doesn't. The thing is, it doesn't need to be the same ratio as the LS. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to make the motors the same. The reason that they make different power is because they're different. So then we would also have to make a fast manifold for the small block Chevy, which would be hard to do. The camshaft that's in the small block has more lift, more cam lift, has more lobe lift. And that's, pretty standard because it has less rocker ratio, but it has more cam lift and it's multiplied by less rocker ratio. I would put a different camshaft in there to get the lift at least around 600. But in my opinion, it still takes more camshaft in the small block Chevy to make the same power as that you would get from an LS. A Toyota 3TC, I like, 1.64 cylinder, had the Hemi head and a shaft rocker. That's right. Almost Racing thinks it's the weight of the rotating assembly. Yeah, I've never actually weighed the rotating assemblies on those. The short block was already done. And on the 383, I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look and see if I would probably have had bob weight on that stuff, but not the 383 small block. I'd have to look and see what they weigh. Iowa's in the house. Home of Slipknot. Forge high performance pistons, the 4200. That would be the eventual goal. I just put together an LQ4 6-liter with 706 heads and TBS intake. How much power do you think it'll make? You didn't tell me the camshaft. Here's a good test to put many wives' tales to rest. If you have thick wrist pins that don't flex and or DLC coated pins, which shouldn't change the flex, it's just going to change the surface. You can screw the bypass shut on a vacuum pump and pull all it can. I don't think you're going to bend the pin before you suck all of the gaskets out of it, and that's what's going to happen. because I've seen that happen. I've seen them pull seals in if the vacuum gets too high. French Onion, did you have a question? The small block Chevy needs the same stroke as the LS, but it has a bigger bore. Have I ever tested rod length? I did on 3 small block Chevys. We went from a 5.7 to a 6.0, and it did nothing on those, on a 302, a 327, and a 350. I want to test it again on a Ford. We're going to hopefully go from a 509 to a 5.4. When do you get the piston flip video? As soon as I do it. And if you're putting a big cam in your 6-liter, you should put a bigger head on it. I mean, a cam 6-liter makes more power with a 243 or 799 head. It makes a little bit less down low than the 706 head, but unless you're going to put big valves or port the 706 head, then you could do that too. Conventional synthetic blinker fluid. Your blinkers last a lot longer with synthetic. He's getting a new puppy. Pizza. No, we have 2 golden retrievers. As a matter of fact, they're usually in here laying down, watching me do my work. Bob Cosby is a late model Ford racing legend, one of lots of factory stock stuff. Cool. I didn't follow drag racing as much as Evan and those guys did. He did a lot of drag racing. Set records too, and my thing was road racing and Bonneville, so I was way more into that. And in doing stuff for the magazines, I was way more into testing. Those guys were not the tech heavy guys. I did all of or not all of, but that was my thing. That's really what I cared about. I liked being on the dyno. I liked going to the wrecking yard. I liked testing things to show what they did, and that's kind of the direction that I went. Aaron, send me I put my email down. Send me an email and just let me know. And as a matter of fact, the email is just, the email address is one comment down from yours. Julie, it's funny you should say that. You have a Hemi and an LS book coming and a shirt. So you are all set, my friend. When building an NA motor with 12.5 to 1, would you have any reservation with running a composite head gasket blocking head surface? No, you mean an MLS one? If I want over 700 lift cam with stock LS heads, will I need longer valves? You might need longer valves, but you're definitely going to want different rockers as well. DIY with the Richardsons, you're trying to hit 500. Are you the 6-liter guy? Yeah, Andy, I agree. If the low and mid lift flow is way more important than the peak flow is, so if they did have more, then it would be better. That's what we look for in all the head tests I've done, and I've done lots of them. That seems to hold true. And that's why the airflow research heads in a lot of these tests have done very well, because they usually have really big, 3 and 4 numbers, and that's why they make good power. Spends twice as much time there as it does at the peak. Aaron, thank you very much. Let's see. Mike's trying to talk Julius into running compounds. Depends on how much the shirts shrink. I've got larges and extra larges. I use an extra medium. A wrong cam shirt. There's only a couple of those in existence right now. So, Tony, where did you get those bob weight numbers from? Yeah, 500 horsepower, Travis, from an LS is not that hard. 1,000 horsepower Grand Nationals, that is impressive, especially if they do it with the stock, like ported stock heads, which are not great. And really the Grand National, the intake manifold is not great either. The only thing that has really going for it is that it was turbocharged, and so just turn the boost up. Bing Crosby, now they're getting with it. Ooh, with the Titan AFR intake, the composite one. The guys from West Tech have tested a lot of those. 5-cylinder Chevy Colorado motor. That's like the 4200. That's the 5-cylinder version of it. Yeah, I went on Julius was making a comment about the Science 6 MX5, the Miata, and I told them that I was on their live deal or just commenting on their live deal, and told Uncle Tony that they needed to add boost to it, because you could get, you could easily add another 100 horsepower of that thing if that's what you needed. And really everything needs that, even a Miata. Have you tried a marine intake and injection on the small block Chevy? Yeah. I have not. You need to analyze the entire engine and decide on cranking, horsepower, dynamic compression. Cranking, like the cranking compression, in my opinion, is not absolute information. I can make the cranking compression do all kinds of things and have it not make power. If we put high static compression and put a mild cam in it, it's not going to make very much power, but it's going to have a really high cranking compression. And so that's not an ideal thing. The problem is that those are only indicators, and they're not absolutes. It's like dynamic compression. We know how to calculate dynamic compression, but that's not going to tell you what the power is. And it's not going to tell you what the detonation level is. It's only going to give you an indication. It's only one thing that you need to look at. I thought rod to stroke ratio did more for handling octane-based pre-detonation more than power. I'd like to see some either OEM level or Society of Automotive Engineer level testing on that to see if that's conclusive. Tom, I have not talked about the channel changes, which I need to, because I only have about 13 minutes left. The changes to the channel, what I want to do is make it more professional. So one thing I need to do is I'm looking into getting a shop. The shop is more for me to be able to set this up and have a good internet connection, and then have a different view for you guys. We're going to change this around and make it just not my bookshelf. We're going to do the Patreon account. We're going to get that going. We're going to get merchandise going. I'm going to do interviews with green screen stuff, and I just have a lot of plans. Just trying to implement it all with just me and on top of that, do this and do the videos every day and do that stuff. So it makes it hard. But those are all things that I'm going to integrate, and those are all things that I want to happen before the end of the year. And we're already halfway through. So I want to get that stuff done just so that we can take the channel to the next level. I don't have an update on the 4200 heads yet. I'd have to call the machine shop and see. I can't go down there until sometime after the 15th, so they don't have to be done until then. I can hit up John to see if he's got any timing chain sets laying around. That's all that's holding up the Falcon build. Would you guys be interested in chassis dyno bids from Australia? I definitely would, Julius. If you do testing and send me the video, I'll do a video on your Australian dyno testing. I think that would be awesome. Tony, I'd like to see Sherman's test because he knows how to make power. I saw the stuff that he did when he was doing Engine Masters the first year. If wider lobe separation angles improve high RPM power, why do all solid lifter cams seem to have such a narrow LSA? Those statements are not absolute. All solid lifter cams do not have narrow LSAs. Take a look at a big block. A solid lifter big block cam has a fairly wide LSA, and they make solid lifter cams with very wide LSAs, kind of wide, medium wide, tight. They make them in all ranges for big blocks and small blocks and LSs and everything. So you're not just looking at one thing, and lobe separation angle by itself might not do that. What tends to happen, and the reason that people think this is because you look at a blower cam, a factory blower cam like the LS9, and in my opinion, the LS7 is also a blower cam. It has a really, really wide LSA, but what they were trying to do is not, they were kind of trying to make power at the top, but they were also trying to make sure that this thing met emissions and idled nice because it's a factory cam. So put a lot of exhaust duration in it, which is going to help this thing make power, put a wide LSA in it. They weren't worried about low speed power, which a tighter LSA would help because it had a supercharger on it. On the LS7, same thing, because it had a lot of excess displacement. So it was already going to make good torque. So they wanted to broaden the power curve on that thing, which is why they did it. So it works very well. It worked good for idle. And that's the other thing is as you go up in a wider LSA, it tends to improve idle quality, which a tighter LSA gives it the chop, but it also helps make power in the, we say in the low and mid range, but it might be that the right LSA, and we could call that tight if it's 106, let's say, makes more power through your whole curve, your whole RPM range. It just depends on what the other specs are. Yeah, we're up over. And there are lots of things that determine detonation level. Like I still want to do the interview with Brian Tooley on the on softening the chamber, which has a big effect on the detonation threshold. Do you have LS motor books? All of my LS books are gone, unfortunately. They have them at Amazon and those places. If you want to look, they're still available. Yeah, YouTube is buffering again. Yevgeny? There was a Yevgeny, it's a Russian tennis player, if I remember right. What's all going to go in on the new shop that you're thinking about getting? I don't know yet. I'm really only interested. I'd like to rent one small room that I could have good internet connection in, and I could set up the way that I want for doing these kinds of YouTube videos. It would be nice also to have a shop that I could put cars and stuff in and do videos with the cars in the shop and not have to do them on the side of my house and stuff. The 383, I gave you the, Wayne, I listed the runner size on both of the heads on the LS versus the small block Chevy. And I think that they were comparable. I think that they were within 5 cc's of each other. Every cam is a turbo cam, and I've explained that many times. That what I mean by that is it's not that there aren't cams that are more optimized for that. It's just that if you have a cam in your motor, you can put a turbo on it and it will run. It will make boost and it will make more power and it will do all of that. And you're only giving me one spec, a 105 LSA, it will work with a turbo. You can make boost with that. You can put a turbo on there and you will have a turbo motor with that camshaft. I don't know what the lift is. I don't know what the duration is, but it will work. It works with a stock cam. It works with tight LSA NA cams. It works with everything. It's just that it could work better with something different. My point always is that you don't need a dedicated turbo cam. If you already have some sort of NA cam in there, it will work fine. If you have a sloppy stage 2, if you have a stock LS cam, and primarily these are what we're talking about, but it works for a small block Ford or small block Chevy or big block, whatever it is. And none of the stock cams were designed to be turbo cams, at least none of the factory ones. They all work with turbos. Any truck cam will work with a turbo. Any stage 1 NA cam or nitrous cam, they'll all work with turbos. And that's kind of what I'm saying when I'm doing the every cam is a turbo cam. Yevgeny was a Russian bookie. That's the right kind of name for that sort of vocation. What do you want me to make a deal with Jerry for? LY6, sloppy stage 2, 823s, S480, 87, 82 truck manifolds, 4-inch air-to-air pump gas. The pump gas stuff I don't like. You're not going to be able to run very much timing in it. That's an awful big turbo, but it should work good on a 6-liter. You're going to be running, I don't know, 10 or 12 pounds probably, and not very much timing. Look at some of the stuff Matt's done over on Sloppy. He's going to have some stuff that they ran on pump gas that should give you a fairly good number. Oh, make a deal with Jerry on his shop. I don't want to work there. I need my own clean shop that I can do my own stuff with. I don't want to be in anybody else's way. Yeah, Mike, it's much easier now. Just grab a cam. Like I walk over, and the example I use is I walk over to my stack of camshafts, and if it's an LS cam and I grab an LS cam, if I put that in the motor, it will work. It will work with the turbo. Yeah, the bottom of the shelf biggest cam is not, it can work for an actually aspirated motor, but it's not it's not the end all for turbo stuff. Yeah, Devin, that's what we tell people is that have them put the cam in that builds the power curve that they want, because you're going to pick the cam not for turbo or not turbo. You're going to pick it for the RPM range that you're running, a lot like the intake manifold. So the camshaft should match the intake manifold. If you have a fast manifold or a truck manifold, you're not going to pick a camshaft that's 275 degrees of duration at 50 for your 5.3 LS. That's not going to mate well together, because the camshaft wants to make power at 8,500 and your intake manifold wants to make peak power at 6,500. So that's not a good combination. So you pick the cam to work with your intake and your cylinder head, and then you have this NA power, and then you add boost to it, and then you just multiply that curve. Can you do a carburetor size test? I'm going to. I meant to do that on the Cadillac, and we wanted to do it on the Buick. So we're going to run a 650, 750, 850, and 950 to kind of show what they do. I wanted to do that on, like, the Cadillac was perfect because it was like around 400 horsepower, and everybody's still saying, that 500-inch motor, that needs an 850 or 950 carburetor, and it really doesn't. Not at 400 horsepower, because that's all the airflow that it gets. So it doesn't need that big of a carburetor. It will work better than a 400 horsepower 289 with a bigger carburetor, because it will have more signal down low. So it will drive better with a bigger carburetor, but it doesn't need that bigger carburetor because it's only making 400 horsepower. Be water, my friend. Thank you very much. And if you put it in a cup with scotch, it becomes scotch and water. Do I have a cam for sale for my LS53? I don't know what you're trying to do with it. Tell me, what do you need, a truck cam or a race cam, or what are you trying to do? Ford Modular 4.6 PI, what can I do to get more power? You can port the head, you can put cams, you can put headers, you can put the fancy elbow on there, although I wouldn't do that, but you definitely can put boost in it. Have you ever boosted the we did boost the Gladiator, but we boosted the Gladiator 2, the one that's a 372. It's a dart block one. It's a 4125 bore dart block. And we did run boost on that. That was 350 and 520 horsepower. I don't remember making 520 horsepower from a 350. Please start selling cams. I'm not going to start selling cams. I will have some of the leftover cams that I made, just the development ones, coming up here before too long. Earlier, you mentioned longer runners cooling the charge air. I'm curious what the difference in your test is versus Engine Master's test where they determined that the air didn't cool enough to make power. I didn't say that longer runners cool the air. What I said is longer runners, when you introduce fuel at the top of the runner, there's more time for that charge cooling to take place. The runner itself isn't doing the cooling because there's very, very little time for heat to transfer from the tube, assuming that would be cooler, to the charge air. You're cooling the charge air with the introduction of fuel, and that's what we did with Honda by putting the fuel injectors in front of the air horn, so it cooled basically the whole length. Because what you're doing is that stuff is traveling really, really fast. And, every compression cycle is happening very, very fast. So there's not a lot of time for the air to be cooled before it goes in and gets fired again. So the longer that you have to introduce the fuel to the air and the longer the time you have for that cooling, the cooler that the air is going to get. Yeah, Aussie Speed for the Slant 6. Check out that stuff. They sent me an intake manifold, which we're going to test, and those guys are awesome. The Godzilla motor looks very impressive. Some guys are doing some very cool stuff with it. One time on an I-15, I converted my engine to air cooling. That happens. John, John, I can't believe that they hid your comment about the 3 thumbs down. Yeah, the NASCAR guys are injecting fuel higher in the intake manifold. Everybody is. Formula One did. They injected it up at the top of the air horn. They also had a secondary injector down low for drivability, which helped. Because you can, if you watch that, if they had a camera in there, you could see fuel standoff. And we saw this on the Honda when we were running. As you go through the RPM range, you can actually see fuel coming out of the trumpet and then going back in. It's very, very cool. We saw a similar thing when they ran that really long Dodge manifold that they had, the Sonic Ram, where it had 2 carburetors mounted basically over the edges of the valve covers. And there were 2 Carter carburetors, I think, that they ran on there, as if I remember right. And then they kept, and this was a stroker version of that motor, so it was 500 inches, I think, and they were running it with that long runner manifold, and they kept having to adjust the RPM down on the dyno to find peak torque. And I think it eventually made peak torque at about 2,000 RPM. But they kept lowering it. It kept making more and more torque. And while they would make a run, it was very cool because you'd run it from 2,000 to 5,500 or 6,000, and you could watch the carburetors. You could watch the fuel standoff go above the carburetor and then come back down. It was really awesome. Softening the chamber on a boosted application is definitely worthwhile. What grind did you choose for Schneider to regrind the 420 cams? I actually need to get another set of late model 06 cams for them to grind because I only have one set and I don't want to grind those. We want to make sure that we have that set to test on the 05 motor and to run on the 06 motor. So I need to get another set, and Jerry didn't have any. What do you see as the next big thing in pushrod motors? See, they're doing variable cam timing, which works very well. I would like them to see if they have a if the cam is in the block. I'd like to see them be able to individually adjust the intake and the cam, the intake and the exhaust cam lobes with a cam and block. I think that would be a neat trick. Yeah, the guys at BTR can help you out with your drift burnout motor. Watch the video LS carb versus injection, only a few horsepower. That's probably the one that I have on the channel. We used 802s, and it is better for engine life. So it sounds like you watched the video that I have up. What Brule is saying is that when you cool the, oh, my camera's freaking out again. He was saying that when you cool down or heat up, because like one of the myths, the great myths in automotive land is heat soak. So when that intake manifold gets hot, really what's happening is the aluminum intake is taking heat out of the motor and radiating it to the air. That's what's happening. But when that intake manifold is hot and you have air flowing through the intake manifold, everybody thinks that heat goes from the manifold to the charge air, and that doesn't happen. There isn't time for that to happen, and that's what Brule was saying. If you calculate the airspeed through the manifold, if the air is, and that's what they showed, that down at the end of the port near the head, there was almost no change in temperature of the air. From the ambient air down to there was almost no change, and there wouldn't be because there isn't time for the heat from the manifold to go into the moving air. It's going so fast, there's a boundary layer. So it's, like I said, it's very, very hard unless it's going very slow at idle or you're cruising around. At wide open throttle, it's very hard for heat to radiate into incoming air. It just doesn't happen. And that's the point that they were making on that test with Engine Masters. As a matter of fact, the thing that they did that improved the charge air, that changed the charge air the best and made the best power was cooling the fuel, which is another test I want to do. Garrett Engines advertised 800 horsepower out of an ASCS engine, 360 cubic inch conventional cast iron block, 23 degree. I know it's alcohol injected, but how? 800 horsepower out of a 360 inch motor with a 23 degree head. I don't know how that's possible. 800 horsepower out of 360 inches is going up into not very old cup motors, and a cup motor's not 23 degrees. So I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know how you can get the head flow out of a 23 degree head, unless they're doing a 360 inch big block with a 23 degree head that flows 400 plus CFM. Then maybe they could do that, and they're injecting it with alcohol, which would definitely help. And they've got stack injection. Then that's possible. I don't know how you do that with a small block if that's what they're trying to do. I'd like to see port and direct injection for the future. That would be good, like Chevy did with the ZR1 motor. What's your go-to cam for a twin turbo 496? Phytech EFI instead of Promax 340 heads. I would use that cam that we always use, Hot Mess. I would use that BR300. That works really well. We've made lots and lots of power with that. If you're trying to get everything out of the 76 millimeter turbos, then you could go to something bigger than that. Yeah, Grant, I've seen the Chevy Ilmore motor that Penske did. That they immediately outlawed because it was a really, really good idea. Oh, a sprint car motor. Okay, that makes sense. But 360 inches, I thought that the sprint car stuff wasn't 360 inches. I thought that they were 400 or more. But a Cleveland head's not 23 degrees, though, right? Yeah, CJ, that will continue forever. That the heat soak thing is something. Yeah, I know, Grant. I know that there's different displacements. I know that there's different classes. I just thought that the guys that were making 800 plus horsepower had bigger motors. Admiral's in the house, and it's just about time for me to go. The Chevy for Life, the drivability would be much better with a fast manifold than the Victor Jr. style and a throttle body. The Victor Jr. short runner stuff will make a lot less power than the fast will on that combination. Yeah, at time that's what I thought. The guys that were running 800 horsepower had 18 degree or even shallower valve angle heads, not a conventional 23 degree head. Airwolf. Okay, guys, I got to get going. Thank you all for showing up. I will be back tomorrow, and I got a turbo video that will be going up hopefully tomorrow morning, I think. Thanks for showing up, guys. I'll see you all tomorrow. And Julius, look for your thing. I don't know when it'll be there. I don't know how long it takes to get to Australia, but it's on its way, man. Thanks.